Hey, if you're wondering how much revenue per employee a typical tech startup has, then you've come to the right place. I'm going to answer that question for you today. We did a study of 234 tech startups, and we were able to get data from Partner Starter Story that provided revenue and employee data for these 234 different tech startups. We're able to calculate then a lot of cool information, and I'm going to dig into the details of what we found in the study here today. But first of all, my name is Adam Hoeksema. I'm the co-founder of Projection Hub, where we help entrepreneurs create financial projections for potential investors, lenders, or just internal planning. So let's dig into the study. So the first thing, just to kind of level set about the study itself. So we looked at 234 tech startups in 4 different categories. So we've got B2B software startups, B2C, business to consumer software startups, direct to consumer or product-based startups, and then marketplace companies. And you can kind of see the breakdown of, we've had almost 100 direct to consumer companies in the study, 94 B2B, 30 marketplaces, and then just 11 B2C software companies. And we also looked at these companies broken down by companies that are less than 2 years old, 2 to 4 years old, and then greater than 4 years old. And you can see the breakdown of that as well. 140 of the companies that we looked at were over 4 years old, 64 in the 2 to 4 year stage, and 30 of them were less than 2 years old. We are also able to determine whether they raised investment or were bootstrapped. And this is an estimate, a good estimate from our data source, but that we were able to determine from the data. So here's what we found. This is looking at a revenue per employee for all of the companies. Not broken down by bootstrap versus raised investment. So right here, you'll notice that direct to consumer really stands out, right? So these are e-commerce or product-based companies where they have a significant portion of cost of goods sold, right? And so significant expense that is cost of goods sold, which means that they really need to generate more revenue per employee to be able to afford to pay those employees. So you can see that they averaged $558,000 in annual revenue per employee. Then the other 3 types of businesses, the marketplaces, B2B software and B2C software companies, all really generate around the same amount, or right around that 200,000, just a little under 200,000 in annual revenue per employee. And this was for all companies, whether they raised investment or bootstrap. But then what was really interesting was looking at the differences then here in this section of the graph. Those companies that raised investment generated much less revenue per employee. And the reason why we think is because they had raised additional investment, which allowed them to hire faster, spend more money before they had enough revenue to support the employees. Really, that investment, those investment dollars were allowing them to hire people faster and sooner than they would otherwise. So then you can see then companies that were bootstrapped and really had to be able to make payroll with their revenue, the numbers are quite a bit different here. So the next thing that we looked at was the average revenue per employee over time. So you can see that in all the cases here, when they were less than 2 years old, they generated less revenue per employee compared to over time. As they became more established, they kind of leveled out. And we can see, I think this is a good example here, this direct-to-consumer company, average revenue per employee over time. You can see that when they're less than 2 years old, they're generating $223,000 in annual revenue. Gets up to $550,000 from that age 2 to 4, and then really levels off here around $600,000 for the 4-year-old companies and older. So we really took away a few interesting bits of information from this. So the average D2C startup, direct-to-consumer product startup, generated 2.5 times the revenue per employee compared to software startups. And again, we've kind of already hit on that, but because of the cost of goods sold component there, they needed to generate more revenue to be able to cover those employee salaries. We noticed that bootstrap startups generated 5 times the revenue per employee compared to startups that raised capital. And so on average, bootstrap startups generated approximately $400,000 in revenue per employee compared to just $75,000 per employee for startups that raised investment. The average revenue per employee increases the older that the company gets. So we saw that with the D2C example, that it kind of leveled out over time. It increased and then leveled out. And we saw that really across the board. And then finally, software startups generally have around $200,000 in revenue per employee. And this really seemed to be a good number kind of across the board of all stages. Maybe it increased a bit over time. And then just finally, as a kind of an interesting example, we noted 2 different B2B software companies that generated 1.7 million and 1.5 million in revenue per employee. And interestingly, the 1.7 million in revenue company per employee had 35 employees. So they had a lot of revenue, but also a lot of employees. And then the 1.5 million revenue per employee just had one single employee. So there's one employee generating 1.5 million in revenue. So that's a great business right there. Hopefully that was helpful just as you're working on your own projections and trying to understand what is normal for your industry and your business type. How does that kind of scale over time? And this can also help you with your hiring plan. So as you're projecting your revenue over time, you can determine, hey, this is when I should probably add in another hire, or when I think I can afford it based on what we've seen with other startups in your space. So again, if you have any questions or comments, or you generate a different amount of revenue per employee, we'd love to hear from you. So leave a comment down in the video comment section in the YouTube video below, and or reach out to us at support@projectionhub.com, and we'd love to hear from you. Thanks.